rangatira mā, no mai haere mai. Welcome, good afternoon. Welcome to our council meeting this afternoon. And could we start with our opening prayer, please, by Councillor Redstone. E tū, thank you.
Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa pounamu te moana. Hei hua rahi mā tātou I te rangi nei. Aroha atu, aroha mai. Tātou I a tātou katoa, hui tai kie. So I'll do it in English. May peace be widespread. May the sea be like greenstone, a pathway for us all on this day. Let us show respect for each other, for one another, bind us all together. Amen. Thank you.
Kia ora, great singing waiata today, beautiful. Can we, any apologies or leave of absence? None have been received so far. Councillor Watkins.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to leave at 2:45 today.
Thank you. Any other leave of absence? Move that from the chair. All those in favour, please say aye. Oh, sorry. Councillor Kerr, did you? Second, thank you. Any against? Thank you, that's carried. Confirmation minutes, there were no minutes to confirm. And if we move on now to item number 5, welcome to Mr. Hanson, the Director of Major Capital Works. And this is a drinking water capital project update. Welcome to you. Oh, sorry.
Yep.
Mr. Chief.
If I can, through Your Worship, I'll make some introductory comments, but I would like to take the opportunity. This is the first time the full council has met since Annie Aranui's passing, and I just would like to acknowledge in a full council setting the tremendous contribution that Annie made to the Hastings district over many years. We were all really shocked at the tragic and unexpected passing of Annie. But she was front and centre in so many things that we were advancing in terms of the agenda for our communities across the Hastings district, from COVID recovery to employment to housing, and was always there. And whilst we paid our respects across the council at Motiu Marae, I just wanted to take the opportunity in our full council setting to acknowledge Annie's passing. Just by way of some introductory comments before I pass to Mr. Hanson, I just wanted to reflect that as the Chief Executive, it's never great coming to council with a situation where we're asking for expenditure outside of budgets. But I wanted to just reflect on at the big picture level that for this council, post Havelock North, safe drinking water has been this council's number one priority. It has been a multi-year journey that we have been on, and we are a long way through our drinking water program. We were here in February 2020, last time substantially talking about the program and what was in front of us, and I'll ask Mr. Hanson to talk about some of that context shortly, but just wanted to reflect on that we are now in year 4 of a significant drinking water program implementation, that we have achieved a lot across the network that we've been rebuilt with our main trunk lines, with our Wilson sort of road, Havelock North booster pump station, long way through our small community water upgrades, and have a period of sort of 15 months in front of us that, subject to the conversation this afternoon and the conversation that will take place in PX subsequently, the opportunity to implement fully the drinking water plan that this council's adopted and has been approved by the regulator. Mr. Henson, I'll pass to you.
Just before we move on to Mr. Henson, can I just remind councillors that the reason why we're looking at a PX item today is because we're looking at a tender process and contractors. So I just want to remind you that we're not getting both papers mixed up, and why we have got a PX, because we are talking about confidential commercial information in the PX. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship, and Nigel and councillors. Good afternoon. Look, rather than just take the paper as read, I think the paper and the issues are of scale and significance. And rather than troll through the detail of the paper, I'm happy to answer questions through the context of it. But I thought I'd just perhaps give some context that might help some of the thinking as to why we've ended up where we are, and what appears to be, on the face of it, perhaps quite rapidly to a position that I'm back here with a significant sum of money in front of you. And not that the context would have changed in terms of how it may have transpired if we had carried on in an orderly fashion, project by project, as opposed to where we've ended up. So if I take you back to 20th February 2020 last year, pre-COVID, I was last here with a substantial update in terms of where we were heading, what the component parts of the program were, what we were committed to at that time, which is, while it's only a year ago, it seems quite distant in terms of the things we were doing at that time, and it's been quite helpful, I suppose, or a bit cathartic outside of the challenge of this meeting, to think about what's been achieved in the intervening 12 months. But at that time, I highlighted the issue of, I suppose, the big components of Eastbourne and Frimley and what was in front of us, both from a design, conceptual and design journey that was still in front of us, the challenging consenting processes we have, and then ultimately through into a tender build and construction phase, which is the journey we've been on. And so the first half of 2020, we stayed the course on a reasonably sensible journey, albeit that COVID disrupted that, but we were able to tender work in the fashion we expected, reservoirs, bores, in sort of component parts or sizeable elements that were intended as part of the work program. In the second paper, relevant to this open paper, is that we got what I called a little bit of respite or help through the early part of COVID, where some of the heat was taken out of the market, particularly the private sector market in Hawke's Bay, that was very buoyant around building and larger scale projects. So even in those early stages of 2020, we were struggling to get a lot of interest in our work, and a lot of it was built around our processes and the need for a public body to be transparent and follow what is defined as due process within council. So that was alongside a market that was, a lot of things were being done on the back of a handshake or a negotiated position without the level of formality we're committed to. As I say, we got a bit of respite through the sort of the actual close down period of COVID, where a lot of that work dried up, and so there was actually an associated higher level of interest in our work. And if you can recall, the tender we got for the reservoirs, as an example, was one of the very few that's actually came in under budget. I was optimistic that would last for a period of time, but the counter to that was the challenges of the extended consent process with the Frimley project that took us through into August, September. Our probably inability to put the major components of work out at that stage until we had absolute certainty on that site. I did bring papers to council to commit to the bores and the reservoirs, and the broad assumption at that stage is if we were unsuccessful at Frimley, we had to put them somewhere so those elements could be used. The water treatment plants, which are the two big elements I'm talking to you about today, are relatively bespoke and unique to the two sites we've ended up on. So in that journey, once we'd got through the end of the delayed process of the consenting, we then opted to attempt to direct negotiate a position with the Frimley Water Treatment Plant. And the reason for that was primarily driven around the fact that alongside the compliance deadlines that we're attempting to work to, that we ended up with a whole lot of large concurrent work trying to be carried out in a very constrained area in Frimley Park. So my thinking at the time was to say, well, could we negotiate directly with one of those contractors, of which we had three, and a range of subcontractors to negotiate this part of the work, so we had 3 instead of 4 contractors, just to make it physically more manageable on the site. So that was the rationale in September, and we went through a reasonably extensive open book process, and the result of that was that we got prices that were well in excess of our budgets. So broadly $6.5 to close to $10 million as a difference. At that point in time, and I wasn't convinced what was driving that, and at that stage, it coincided with the start of the pre-election PGF Infrastructure Fund, significant commitment of additional money into the market in terms of buoying the economy for other reasons. And so we were straight back into, in fact, very rapidly in September, October, into a market that was, we were competing with the same challenges we'd had pre-COVID. So on that basis, I didn't feel comfortable to bring the paper to council at that point with about a $3.5 million headache, having not gone through any form of open tender to give you any confidence that it was who was right and who was wrong, and you know, the levels of confidence around that process. So we then opted to go the other extreme, which was to then drag the last 3, or the last 2, making 3 large components of projects into one large contract. And the intent of that was to attempt to drag more of the major players out of the market into an interest in our game. Rightly or wrongly, that's what we did. Experiences from other councils around the country that I spoke to were doing, in fact, some were doing what we were doing. We were attempting to encourage size and scale as an option. Others were actually, which is perhaps a position I would have encouraged us to go to had we had time, are actually going the other way. They're disaggregating them back into smaller contracts, attempting to negotiate and manage costs and deal with the element of subcontractors pricing and it being added to in a major contractor context. So through that process of late 2020, we then went to the market. It became evident, we went through a tender period commencing just pre-Christmas through into the new year, and we had a tender meeting with prospective contractors to determine what the level of interest was. And at that point, we only had one player showing interest, and it was coincidentally the same player that we'd attempted to direct negotiate with. So it was a challenging position to believe we were going to be no better off than we had been in September through the direct engagement process. Another player came out of the woodwork at that time and asked us to extend the tender period by 3 weeks to give us a chance to have an alternative bid position. And we did that, and we've ended up with the prices we have that we'll discuss in the public excluded paper. So it's actually through that process that we've ended up with the net impact of those 3 large contracts and the knock-on effects that is the background to this paper. And again, it would be cold comfort if I said to you, well, I could have bought the Frimley contract to you in September and said, well, look, the pain of this is about $3 million. I would have been back here with Eastbourne at some point with either that plus some more, subject to what occurs as we head forward into the challenges of material costs, labour costs, shipping challenges, all the things we're experiencing at the moment. And I suppose in terms of a final part of the context is that it's sort of somewhat pleasing that the elements that we have more of a tradition in, which is pipework and building components, are somewhat reflective of the budgets, or more reflective of the budgets than perhaps the water treatment plants and the significant component parts within it. That's the area that we are really being challenged around the costs. So there is a way forward that we've discussed in the public excluded paper, but I thought it would give you context about why it appears a large sum of money in a very short period of time. Well, it's actually been quite a long journey for the project team, but the net result is we're here with the headache as presented in the paper. So perhaps,
And just the final thing that I'd add to it, because obviously with this being so critical for our community and our number one priority, so I think reflecting that, I think it's reflected in the paper, we're a long way through our drinking water program, and I think back to the conversations we were having in February 2020 of the last paper, some things that were clearly signalled around, we've still got a consenting processes in front of us. These are our best estimates that we won't be able to firm up until we've gone to the market. I guess when I look at where we're at now and the 15 months that's in front of us, a lot of that uncertainty has been removed in terms of we're through design, we're through consenting, we've been to market, we've got a price. Obviously, we will deal with in PX. We've got, a contractor that's willing to do the work. So in terms of level of confidence, when you look to a finish line next year around what is our drinking water strategy, there isn't much uncertainty left now with what's in front of us on the final run-in on our drinking water strategy. So,
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation. I'll start with questions first, please, councillors. Questions starting with Councillor Kerr.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr Hanson, when did you first become aware that we were going to be requiring additional funds to complete this project?
so the total picture only became available at the close of tender in early March. So the actual total picture for three large components of work that we've got in front of you at the moment is only resulted from a tender closing, or tender closing for evaluation on the 3rd of March. So an element of it was understood or known late last year in respect of Frimley, but in terms of going to the market to determine whether that information was fair or representative has only been known in this tender that we're considering next.
May I ask just a follow-up question? When it went out for tender, just a couple of questions. Was there a real risk of no interest at all? And the second question is, the way the tender was structured, was it best price, best quality, or a balance of both, and why?
I was optimistic we would get a level of interest, and what I meant by that was that, 3 or 4 of the major players, as we identify them at the moment. I was surprised at the tender meeting we had, which was halfway through the tender process. There was only appeared to be one significant player at the table, and probably reinforced the experience I found late in last year with, say, all the PGF and infrastructure fund works out on the market. And it appears to be that the water market is a more challenging one. There's these and I'll describe it in the next paper a bit clearer, but these projects are large and complex and multifaceted, where if you build a building or you build a road, and not discrediting those, but they tend to be focused on one significant key element. This has so many moving parts that it's a challenge for someone to front the thing and then go out and negotiate and aggregate all the component parts to make up the bid. So there are 4 or 5 subcontractors, but they're actually, not dissimilar in size or scale to the people fronting this. So a little bit of relevance around the water contract. In terms of your second question, we used the price quality method, which in this instance was, we were looking to maintain our absolute standards around the quality and the expectations of what safe water is. In that context, and a bit of a challenge for us, we dished up in excess of 3,000 pages of tender documents, so a short contract period with an expectation of trolling through that level of information, volume of information and level of detail, pulling together a aggregated and coherent bid, and maintain our standards was a challenge for them, certainly through the Christmas New Year period as well. And that's been our challenge, is to ensure that we're getting what we understand we need and have asked for, but it's also corresponding to perhaps a bit of a saving grace in terms of what I term the value engineering components that we're still going to go out on those 2 particular projects.
Okay, Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you, Mr Hanson, for your summary. The community keep asking me, why do we need to have storage tanks when we've never needed them in the past?
Okay, a good question and a reminder of the fundamental change that we're making to our supply of water, or the water supply network, and how it's intended to operate in this new regime. So at the moment, without taking too much time, but at the moment, we simply suck water out of the ground with massive big pumps down existing bores. And those pumps not only suck it out of the ground, they push it into the network under very high pressures, to the extent that we've got to maintain those pressures to the very furthest outposts of the network, so Havelock, Flaxmere, Bridge Park. What we're doing with storage, which is disaggregating or disconnecting the source water, which is one of the 6 principles of safe water, is to protect our source water, is that we are disconnecting the network from the source water. We are using much smaller pumps to suck it out and constantly put it through the treatment process of chlorine and fluoridation. And the tanks serve 2 purposes. One is to allow that process to do what it needs to do in terms of the actual treatment process in the storage body, but it also has that second component of a large volume of water above ground in the times of an emergency that the city would have access to. So it's this primarily changed approach of just sucking untreated water out into the network and pushing it to all corners, versus what we now need to do with it: store it to allow it to do its thing, and also provide a more manageable above ground delivery of water to the city. It's actually I suppose it's going back to what it used to be, and as exists in a lot of cities around the country at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. Can I respectfully suggest that our comms team pick that up and tell the community and inform them, because it's not known out there why we actually need them.
Thank you. And
Thank you for that.
thank you, Councillor Dixon. I think we're about ready to do another community water upgrade, like we were doing every 2 months, just to keep community informed about why we do what we do. And I think it's really important that we get that out as
Thank
soon
you.
as
And
possible.
just a second question. If we need to reintroduce fluoride into the system, has that been accommodated in the costs that are there at the moment, or is that going to be an additional cost?
So for the 2 projects we're talking about today, which are Eastbourne and Frimley, all of the process, including the intention of operating that, is included in this project.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions. The first one is about the 3 million stimulus funding, which was previously allocated to the backflow prevention project. If this is delayed, I'm just wondering, will we still meet the council's safe water objectives as per the adopted drinking water strategy?
I'm looking around the room for Mr. Dew, who's not here.
Yeah. The short answer is yes, we meet it. What we took the opportunity to do was to look to accelerate the backflow preventer, but it's not. It doesn't compromise the safe drinking water plan that's been approved by the drinking water regulator.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, just additional to that, the 600,000. So there was 3.6 million, of which 600,000 retained deals with the most immediate challenges, so that we remain in that position.
Okay, thank you. Also, so the work outlined in this paper will substantially complete our waterworks. I just want reassurance that the rest of the work that needs to be done, will this be met within budget, or are you quite confident it will be?
The answer's optimistically yes. So at this point in time, and sorry, what I meant by the substantial element is we still have an element of the Waiaroha part of the project to tender, which will be the education building. So the component parts of the water project, which is what this paper is about, and hence the large component of what is the base infrastructure project, my expectation is that we deliver it with this budget review. And that's challenging on the basis of the unknown of what we're going to expect over the next 12 to 18 months around materials and all the things that you're hearing in the market, versus my position that we're expecting to negotiate some, trying to think of the right word, I was going to say substantial, significant savings with the value engineering discussions we've got to have for the Frimley project, that we would expect to transpire or translate immediately into the Eastbourne project, which follows sequentially in terms of building them. So we are in discussions around both savings, immediate savings available to us, but also value engineering elements from our side, the Hastings District side of the fence, that we believe we can realise, and that those savings will offset any further unknown market headaches that are in front of us.
Thank you.
Councillor Nixon.
Thank you. Two questions, sort of. One is dealing with the technical aspect of backflow prevention. During the official inquiry after the gastro crisis, it was frequently referred to the fact that E. coli outbreaks had been due to backflow from cisterns and all sorts of other things. And so I just wonder, how are we reducing our security of the water supply by not going ahead with this project? And I guess connected to that is, are there cost implications, additional cost implications of not proceeding with that program? Because everything we seem to delay seems to put the price up. And I'm sort of wondering if it's wise to delay that, or whether we should actually agree to carry on with backflow prevention and simply borrow the extra money.
Right, wait for Mr. Thu.
Yeah, sorry, that was
If that's okay, we'll answer that one. I'll come to others that you may be able to answer, but we need the drinking water strategy owner.
I accept that, and
Yeah.
I'd be happy to bring the question.
Thank you.
But another issue is the how close, how much of the, how can I put this? We agreed to increasing the loan funding limits a week or two ago. How much of that will we eat up with this particular? I know what the amount of money is, but what percentage? I mean, what have we got left? I can't remember some of the details.
Through your worship, so in response to that question, our current debt forecast within the LTP is circa $280 million. What that meant through, I think it was around 24, 25 years, 2020, 24, 25, we had anticipated with the current limits that we had at 150% of income that we would get close to breaching those limits. Increasing to 175% of income, what that does, as we go through the plan, our income increases, as you would expect over that time. That by year 10 gives us a monetary limit of around $400 million. So there is still quite significant financial headroom for council as we work our way through the long-term plan over the next 10 years to make sure that we're maintaining our position within the fiscal constraints that we've set. I think that, and to remind you all also that those constraints that you've set around our Treasury policy limits are conservative within the realms of what we are allowed to borrow through the local government funding agency and where a lot of other councils sit around the country.
The last question I have is, and it's probably more to you, Graham. I mean, do we actually have any alternative but to proceed?
Well, that's the question that you're asked today. Yes, you do have alternatives, but we have to meet the drinking water standards. You could stage some other projects, but we've got to get the storage in to meet the new standards. So this is a welcome, Mr. Thu. I've got a question for you. So that's what the officers are asking you today, and you have to be comfortable that you are satisfied this extra spending on safe drinking water strategy. You've got a question now for you, Craig.
Well, perhaps just in further response to that question, is that I suppose our challenge is we are so far into the game and we are so committed on other costs, and what I mean by that is that we are several $1 million committed into material costs and component parts of each of those projects because of the challenge around getting those materials from around the world. That through these processes, we are now well in the gun for both of these sites and for all of the component parts other than the contracts you're going to talk through the public excluded element. So we are we are so committed to the other elements of it, is of significance.
If you'd asked me the question, I think I would have given you the same answer. So it wasn't that I didn't know the answer. Mr. Hugh, the question I was asking was about the backflow prevention. And if you remember during the official inquiry, it frequently came up as a potential source of some of the E. coli outbreaks we'd had in the past. And so what I'm trying to understand is, what are the implications of us delaying the program? Is there a risk it'll simply put the cost up? I don't want to find that we delay it and then it costs us $6 million instead of the $3 that we're currently budgeting, because everything seems to be going up. I mean, if you twist my arm, I'd probably agree to just going ahead and borrowing the extra money, if you give me a good argument.
Thank you. Councillor Nixon, good question and comment.
So,
Mr.
through you,
West,
Your Worship,
yeah.
so in your LTP, prior to the government money coming up, we were looking at funding this full program. So both the 3.6 million, which we had initially earmarked out of the Three Water Stimulus Funds, plus an additional $6 million that's in your existing LTP. So we have a substantial program already in the LTP. What we did with the Three Water Stimulus money is we brought forward some of that work. What we would be looking to do, as the paper signals, is advancing, moving the money across into the main water program, and then refinancing those backflow preventers in the early, middle and late in the plan. The reality is, at the moment, the cost of buying anything, because of the massive demand, because of the $710 million of investment nationwide, is it might cost us more to do it right now than it will in a year and a half's time, because the government stimulus money must be spent by March next year. And so there are limitations on how much work you can get done, and if you want to do it fast and import things by aeroplanes and so forth, it actually will potentially cost us more to do it that fast. We've left the $600,000 of it, and we're indicating to leave $600,000 of the 3.6, and that will be added to the $600,000 that's in your existing plan to progress the first layer of the high risk ones, and then we'll carry on with the high and medium, and then into the low risk later in the plan.
The question here was meant to be a technical one rather than a financial one. In other words, we're not taking any risk. Is this backflow prevention program for households, or is it to prevent backflow in the broader system? Because I'm actually a bit unsure.
So it's connections to properties. So
Yes,
some
okay.
So the low risk ones would be a standard residential property. We would have a low order check valve, non-testable check valve. And then you have sites that might have water tanks, or it might be a multi-storey building, or they may be of a particular activity where they have water under pressure, and then we'd classify those as medium or high risk. What the 3.6 million did was fully fund all the medium and high risk, with council doing the full install for the backflow rather than under the Building Act, where there's a bit of a mixed management, which creates a mixed outcome, as you recall from the inquiry.
Now you've explained it, I do understand the motive behind it. I'm just trying to, we haven't done it. Are we taking some sort of risk with the quality of water, or is it really just it's just a program really that we're conforming with a standard rather than saying we've got a problem?
So we do have backflow in the system already. This is just building on what we've got. It's a timing. All this is a timing, is how fast do we do it, and we'll go back to a calmer implementation as was originally planned before the government funds become available, which enabled us to look at accelerating.
Thank you.
I think fundamentally important that we get compliant water through these projects ahead of the backflow prevention component. So I think in terms of a scale or an order of risk and magnitude, getting fully compliant water as quickly as you can, which is the reason I'm here with deadlines all the time, is the most important issue.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sears.
Thank you, Your Worship. And thank you, Mr. Hanson, for the report and the discussion, which I think helped build a little more context around it. I think all ratepayers are aware that anyone who's tried to put in a new kitchen or do any building is aware that construction costs have exploded post-COVID. And I think that the fact
Question,
that.
councillor Sears, do you have a question for the officers?
Yes, I do
Thank
have
you.
a question, Your Worship. I'm interested in the percentage increase in construction costs from the time we estimated to now. The cost difference is so huge. How much of those can be attributed to the post-COVID construction increase, and whether or not you believe that percentage is about right across our other construction projects?
Look, I'll attempt to give you some sort of coherent answer because, in fact, it is very dependent on which component of the works we are doing that you're referring to. So if you talk about buildings as part of the context, that's had a movement associated with what you're experiencing around materials and costs associated with building, which is very different to the underground pipe market. That is different materials, different abilities to supply large, pipes and materials for those projects, and the percentages are very different. And shifting then into the complexities of the water treatment plant, which has a large range of pumps, valves, meters and whatever that are all sourced offshore, is a completely different game to dealing with building components within New Zealand. So that if I had to sort of, and I'm probably not necessarily quoting percentages, but if I had to put them in the context, I think the building component, while it's been painful, is I can sort of follow the logic behind that, and issues of 20, 30, 40% are the experience that you're probably alluding to. The pipes and bores, we've probably been relatively successful, which is that comment I made in the, not pre-COVID, but during the COVID lockdown period, we were successful in getting some work out with some interest in it. And contrary to what council would normally do, we've been aggressively procuring and buying the materials for these contracts, either within the contract or purchasing as principal supplied items. So we've got those at rates that were negotiated at the time that we've done that. So an example being that we've bought all of the bore material in the bore contracts. They're going to be still built over the next 4, 5 or 6 months, but all of that material is in the country on site for those contracts. So our experiences have been different on a job-by-job basis. The most painful component, which is a reflection on perhaps our budgeting, scope creep to a degree in terms of maintaining our very high safety compliance standards, and what the market's doing, which is not only the market and what you're experiencing with just material and labour cost increases, but, and I'm reluctant to say it, but is the component that we're paying for a red hot market, and therefore the tender price just being what the market demands. And if you know you're the only tenderer, that's the elements that we're competing with at the moment.
A question, Your Worship, if I might, another question. You made reference to in your report and in your discussion that part of the issue was the very protracted consenting process. Can you explain, please, why the consenting process took so long? I suppose the genesis of this paper is the Frimley Water Treatment Plant project. So that's the least compliant, so the one that has the most demanding timeline to get compliant. And what I'm referring to is the extended consent process through the submission phase that extended that process by 6 months from what would have been the timelines had we not had submitters. And so we were unable to commit to works with the level of confidence that we had a consent to be on that site. So there was, I know, a number of submissions and a significant one from the community. So the fact that our community wished to submit and have protracted conversations about what was happening at Frimley impacted also directly on our ability to lock in a price. Is that correct?
Absolutely, and has compressed the not only the project but the project timelines to the extent that we now have 4, I wouldn't say competing, but we have 4 large component parts that we're attempting to deliver all at the same time, where we were intending ordinarily to stage those and deliver them in a more manageable way. And that's what has transpired with the Frimley Water Treatment Project that then has aggregated the other 2.
So just to clarify, actually the cost of democracy is also factored into this price rise, which is partly how I see it.
Yes, that's what
Thank
we're
you.
required under the Act to do, make sure our community is well informed and engaged with.
Thank you.
Councillor Barber.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thanks, Graham, for your report. I just note that the last significant update we had was back in February last year. According to the report, in terms of frequency of kind of reporting to council or through a committee, what do we? I mean, what's the plan going forward? Because we want to try and pick these things up early.
So I'll make some opening comments. I think that the last substantive budget paper, as we were bringing all these component parts, was February. Obviously, we report in quarterly against our drinking water program to Ops and monitoring. And I think, as Mr. Hanson said, we probably had an idea at the end of 2020 off Frimley that we were seeing some pressures, emerging. So whether we could have had a conversation earlier on, I'm not sure. In terms of for you as governors, I think we're doing comprehensive reporting against our number one priority every 3 months to council.
That's one other question. The report talks about, Frimley, Eastbourne, which is probably the majority of the cost, overrun. In terms of the small community projects, are we talking overruns in those projects as well? Just that I live opposite one, and I see cars there every day, have been for the last however many months, and I'm just racking up the costs in my head. But yeah, that's the question really. Are we talking about a bit more money in the budget for that too?
Thank you, councillor, and yes, I can comment in section 4.8 of the paper. So of the $9.8 million issue that we're at the table with, 1.85 million relates to small communities. In terms of addressing your question about seeing a whole lot of activity opposite your place, which is one of the small community projects, that's all wrapped up in committed contracts associated with testing and commissioning, and so they are committed costs that are not impacted by us, as in it's the contractor's obligation to build, test, commission and deliver that plant within their costs. So people coming and going is not unusual at the moment on the basis we are commissioning is a very busy time at the end of building the thing. People think we've built it and we're finished and that's it. That's it. The devil's in the detail of actually ensuring everything works as intended. So yes, small communities are a component part of this budget headache. And I've alluded to those. Mr. Cave has given me a summary of the elements of it. Some of them I've alluded to have in fact been in front of council and probably relevant to your previous question about how often do we come here or forewarned of some of these headaches. And it's probably, in fact, not probably, I did talk to it in February last year that it is a challenge because you see component parts of it on a spasmodic basis where we'll bring individual tenders or components of tenders or, recently we had a section of land for Waipariki that is unbudgeted because we have to shift it from public land to private land. So to be fair to you as councillors, you see and hear parts of it, but in terms of trying to make that coherent around the bigger program, that's your message is well heard. So look, some of the pain we're suffering through those small community elements, and it's not thankfully in the significantly large committed contracts, but as we get to sites there are geotech issues, we've had seismic issues, things that you find out when you're on site or when you're opening up the ground that has created headaches for us. Tipui being a good example, we were going to put it on a piece of land that was ours. It was all no cost approach to where when we got there there's a significant seismic issue and we had to shift from that site. We got out of that relatively unscathed with a piece of land for $1 from the adjoining forest, but a good example that we then had to carry out all the geotech, the foundation design, all the other stuff again at that site. And it's the dilemma between how much we do in those investigation phase, spending money up front to know as much as we can to be certain around budgets versus what we do on a as we go basis and the risks associated with that. So small communities do feature, pleasingly not as painfully as the two big water treatment plants and hopefully testament the fact that we've been in that process and project for a wee while, and those costs have hung together largely pretty well.
Thank you. Councillor Shalom?
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a series of questions, if I might, 3. The first one, I'm seeking, I suppose, peace of mind for our community. So this is a significant increase on what was estimated. And what I'm seeking is an understanding of if this is typical, if estimated works increasing this amount when we get to the tender process is typical.
Sorry, could you just...
Which is what we've got. And when it comes to actually the tender process, this is
experiences
typical.
we're having.
Yeah.
Mr. Hughes said no, but I'd say strongly yes. From certainly my counterparts around the country that I'm talking to and that have spoken to me around what the options are for procurement, which are wide and varied. And the reason that they're either contacting us is because we're well advanced in our project and program, which I suppose is a good thing, seeking commentary from us about our experiences and how we've done things, good and bad. Certainly some of the most recent contact I've had from councillors that are our size and bigger is that they're experiencing exactly what we are, and worse than. So it's cold comfort probably to you as councillors, but a bit of personal comfort to me that what we're experiencing is very typical of what's occurring around the country. So and the water space. The water space.
I'll interrupt you there and just reframe.
No, sorry.
Perhaps I wasn't clear. I understand that for this particular project and this particular global environment in which we're sitting at this particular time, we obviously have seen this increase. What I'm hoping to understand, and perhaps I'm better to frame this question to Mr. Thu, is it typical for infrastructure projects like this to see such a radical increase between estimated amounts for a project and the actual costs?
Through you, Madam, Your Worship. For our standard type work that we do, no. On occasion you might have a price increase, but by and large where we're doing work that's largely repetitive, we have a good handle on the market and the market has a good handle on what's expected. So, and it doesn't have some of these particular bespoke complications that Mr. Henson and the team have been working through. So by and large for our transport work and our run-of-the-mill civil works, at the moment for run-of-the-mill pipe work, as Mr. Henson talked about, we're seeing about an 8% increase on sort of 6 to 12 months ago. But we're factoring that into pricing. So to the scale of this one, this is it doesn't play across on our other type of work to this.
Thank you. That does open it up for further questions that might be slightly out of scope of what the Mayor's looking for at the moment. So I'll reserve those for after this, if that's all right, in terms of our procurement processes and how we account for the potential increase in costs, so that we're not looking at an estimate at a specific time, basing all our thinking around that and always having a significant increase. My next question is really around some of the comments you made around the extended consent process for the Frimley project in particular, and the red hot tender process that we find ourselves in at the moment. I would be remiss if I didn't ask a question of you that I've been asked by the community, which is, what happens if we wait? Will the market cool? Can we wait?
Pardon the pun, the $1 million question. I'm seeing nothing in the next 12 months to 2 years that would change the position, be it by volume of work, access to materials, access to particularly materials from offshore, that is going to be any better or change from what we're experiencing at the moment. And evidence of that is we have reservoirs floating around the world that are supposed to have been here 2 months ago that we still have struggling with delivery dates. So yeah, I see nothing in front of us in terms of the committed work program, and still relevant to commitments made last year in the hundreds of millions of major infrastructure projects that still need delivering within New Zealand. Allied with that is then the significance and the focus on water-related projects that I think will further aggravate that in the field that this paper is relevant to.
Thank you.
Can I just follow up on Councillor Shalom's question about estimates versus tender prices and the process? If we look at Eastbourne Waiaraha, and because that's, early on in the journey, only 10% of complete, the revised project estimate, of sum of 27.5 million, has that project been out for tender?
Yes, so
And the education part of Waiaraha been out for tender?
no, so the elements that are out for tender and committed are the two reservoirs, so they are fully committed through to construction. The bores for the project are fully committed through to construction, and the tender paper we're discussing next includes the water treatment plant, so the last major base infrastructure component. The Wairoha education element is still to go to tender.
Okay, thank you. So the estimate is based on the price we currently think we're working on now?
For the Wairoha component.
Yeah.
So that component, in context, has been QS'd by two separate organisations. We are well into detailed design, and currently we're living within our budget expectations, and part of that's been achieved by, in fact, downscaling the size of the education building. So we have options to manage within our budget expectations for that project, as opposed to the base infrastructure, which is that we can't do without pumps and valves, as in making them smaller or removing elements of the project. So we're confident in the building element of Wairoha, particularly with Mr. Wismeyer and his experience around the municipal project, that we have that well covered.
Okay. I mean, what we have done is we've consulted with our community, so therefore anything else, any changes that are going to be made to that development would need council consideration. Thank you. Councillor Redstone?
Thank you, Your Worship. You actually asked part of my question, I think, but I'd just like to clarify that none of this is to do with the Waiaroha education. At this point, all we're doing is making sure that we have safe drinking water completed in a timely fashion. Correct?
Yes.
And the Waiaroha education part was to be separately externally funded in the papers we received,
Yes.
wasn't it?
So it's a component of the 81 million. So in fact, the base infrastructure element of this project is 75 million. So the 81 includes the 6 million associated with Waiaroha. So it's in the estimated total costs, but the tender information that we're looking at in terms of the next paper is the water treatment plants only.
Thank you for that, Mr. Hanson. And in light of the fact we do need to have safe drinking water and in a timely fashion, I'm happy to move the recommendation.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Redstone. Councillor Kerr? Thank you. Councillor Travis?
So, meeting the drinking water standard is both legally enforceable and morally responsible. We began this journey 4 years ago before there actually was the drinking water standard that exists at the moment. And
there's no further questions, councillors? Any further questions?
well, this is leading into a question. So, a casual reading of the news media tells us that many councils are far further behind the 8 ball than we are. In fact, we're at the front of the pack in terms of developing safe drinking water for our people. Given the fact that there's going to be a huge amount of work around the country, do you consider it's likely that we will have probably, because of the fact that we started this project so early, we will have made a substantial saving compared to if we were deciding only to start this project now, as many of our fellow councils are doing up and down the length of the country?
Yes, I mean, I would say the upside of the fact this has been a priority for us for 4 years, and we're a long way into the program. Quite grateful that we're not at the front end of starting a large infrastructure program, given the current context around what we've talked about today with market, supply chain issues, skills and labour shortages.
Thank you. Councillor Kerr?
Thank you, Worship. Are you taking comments now?
Yes, I am now. No further questions.
Thank you. Firstly, Mr. Hanson, thank you. I imagine coming to council and asking for additional funds is never easy, but I've sat here and listened to the answers to the question, and I feel very secure that we are doing the right thing. And we really don't have an option. We have to proceed with this work. And if delaying was appropriate, I'm sure it would have been considered, but having heard from you that delaying is not an answer, the market, as you say, is red hot, and the risk is we simply come back with higher and higher contracts. So thank you very much and support the recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Councillor Sears.
Thank you, Your Worship. While I agree there, again, hearing the answers, there doesn't seem to be options if we're going to deliver safe water. I would like to comment that if the market's this hot and this type of increase can happen, which, you know, you'd have to say is outrageous in terms of an estimate to tender within a year, I'd like to have some confidence that across all our projects, all our major infrastructure projects, that we are considering what's happened and re-looking at any other projects that are currently on the table and could be in a similar position, because I don't think that it's going to be acceptable for this type of thing to be happening month after month after month, not necessarily in the drinking water project, but in some of our others. So I'd like to have some confidence, not now obviously, going forward, that we've considered this problem across all our projects. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Watkins.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I also support the recommendation. I mean, when I saw the figure, a little shiver did go down my back. But I want you just to ponder on what the alternative might have been if we hadn't have got a tender. It would have been more than a shiver, and we'd have had millions of dollars committed and spent in the ground and absolutely nowhere to go. By proceeding with this, we're going to get the project finished. It was an aggressive project. We said we're going to put the shoulder to the wheel, we're going to do it, and this will complete it. Well done, Graham.
Thank you, Councillor Watkins. Councillor Sholham.
I too was pretty horrified by the revised costings that have come to us. This is certainly not something any of us here want for the community, and I acknowledge including our staff. No one brings this to us lightly, and no one is being complacent about the amount of money that needs to be spent here. However, I do want to acknowledge that we are nearing the end of a journey that we've been on for quite some time. And echoing Councillor Travers' thoughts, I am grateful that we started it when we did. And I am incredibly grateful that we are not sitting along dozens of other councils throughout New Zealand who are all going to be vying for the same water expertise and in a market that is red hot and not looking to cool down. So while under normal circumstances there is no way I would support this much of extra spend, I find that this is a prudent use of ratepayers' money in this case. This is an investment in our future.
Thank you, councillors. Just a final comment from me. We all started this journey in 2016. It was never a place that we wanted to have our community in a vulnerable position, and we can be incredibly proud. What we've done is we've added to this water strategy, and while we are asked to face an increase today to deliver the strategy, along the way, we've had communities come to us who also want safe drinking water. And while we started out with a $48 million strategy, we're ending up with an $80 million strategy. And yes, there are many reasons for that, largely because of the hot market we're in, but also because we have extended the program. And that is, to me, that we can hand on heart and stand up in front of our community and say, we have delivered safe drinking water for our community. You know, when we turn off bore 3, when those storage tank goes in, I tell you what, we'll be having the balloons go up, because that is going to be a significant day for us. And next week we will show our fellow councillors our strategy at the Zone 3 meeting, councils from all around Central North Island, and we will show them what we have done, and we can be incredibly proud of that. And also very grateful that we've had the opportunity with that $15 million fund from the Crown to help us move this project along, for us to be able to think about, have we covered everything, that we're not skimping on anything, and has it given us an opportunity to do things and do them smarter. So while when I look at this and you can say this is a budget blowout or this is an increase in what we are delivering, I think this is an increase in what we're delivering, and we can be pretty proud that, as you've all said today, we're not starting out on this journey. We're nearly 5 years into it, and it's been a long journey, and I thank the team and thank you all for your comments today. I'll put the recommendations, have a mover and a seconder. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against? Thank you, that's carried. Now we have the PX item. The recommendation is to exclude the members of the public, and for that reason I would like somebody to... Oh, so there's going to be an extraordinary council meeting next week? Just a meeting of Here Tonga Takiti Noa Māori Standing Committee will be not next week, the 21st of April. So that's just for your information. All councillors have been invited to attend. We discussed that this morning. Thank you. Now we move to item 8, which is the recommendation to exclude public. Can I ask somebody, Mr. Cameron, to explain the reasons for moving into pub keywords?
There's three, Madam Chair. There's 3 items recommended to be considered for public exclusion. All of the items involve discussion of business information of external agencies and or sensitive council negotiations, which are still in progress, so it's recommended appropriate to be held in PX.
Thank you, Mr. Cameron. Have a mover, Councillor Sholem, seconded Councillor Dixon. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against? Thank you, that's carried. Now we move into live stream will be turned off.